That's okay. Welcome everyone to our show tonight. So we have a number of folks on. I'd say I'm going to be the odd man out because all three of these gentlemen do a lot of longsword work and do a lot of studying at it. So I'm super happy to have them kind of on a show doing it. It's something I've been wanting to cover is a lot more fencing and rapier and longsword and all of those pieces. I think the conversation is going to be very much the same that we talk about many times when we're on doing the rattan conversation. So I'm hoping everybody enjoys it. I'm going to figure out how to get rid of this StreamYard stuff because I brought it up by accident. So we'll go from there. There we go. So we got a few folks with us. I'm going to let Master Raphael talk a little bit. It's we're going to cover a book that he's just finished up or finishing up. It's very close to being released, and I'm looking. It's very interesting. The one part I really love about our group and our culture is that we have so many people that dive into things like this. Writing books. We had Paul who wrote one on rattan and specifically our sport that was a wonderful book as well. And we have others that are diving into more and more of the thought on this. And it's super interesting. So when Raphael reached out, I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it. So I'm going to go ahead and pop him on. I'm going to unmute you guys so that at any given time, actually go ahead and unmute yourself and then I will move people into place as we go. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brannos. Hi, everyone. I'm Maestro Raphael. I have a book coming out later this week. So I've been fencing longsword since I want to say 2019 at this point. I was trying to kind of find my place in my local practice. I wanted to be like this specific kind of rapier person. We had someone doing that. I wanted to be this side sword and buckler person. We had a couple people who were the go-tos for that. I was like, oh, there's no one specifically who was the longsword person, right? Now I can craft an identity. Spent a while. I dove into the books. And then years later, I had some free time on my hands. I was like stuck in a very boring office job at the time with nothing to do, stuck in this room by myself. I was like, well, guess I better start writing. So I wrote a book. The book is called Bolognese Longsword for the Modern Practitioner. It should be it'll be out later this week. So it's a modern how-to. So both like it explains the academic side of it, but also it tells you how do you take these 500-year-old books and then go win a fight. As it stands right now, there's a lot of those kind of books for Fiori or for German longsword. So the Bolognese, right, it's kind of like mid-16th century Northern Italy. Right, Marozzo, Manciolino, Delagoche, all these great folks. And no one has written this book in English. Someone wrote this in Italian, but while I'm studying for it, can't read it yet. So I kind of found this niche that no one had touched on. So this is kind of the cover of the book, right? It's got all sorts of stuff in it. So there's like a quick overview. It talks about a few different things. So there's kind of like the history of it, this idea of like structure, right? Winning the mechanical advantage, measure, like understanding your distance, tempo. This is very specific Bolognese idea of Joko that we'll get into. And then I also wrote a lot in there for teachers and coaches specifically. So there's like how to structure drills and how to create appropriate challenges for your students. So it's not just how do I read this book, but it's how do I practice this art, how do I get others to take up this art, and how do I get all of us to do well with it.
Awesome. I think one piece on that is it's been fun because you have a blog that you actually post stuff out to too. That it's been nice because you've been sharing it to the coaches discussion group and stuff like that. And then you posted a number of things actually as you were going through topics. I'm like, I can't wait to hit some of those topics because you actually posted a couple of them. I was like, I like this topic. In fact, one of them, your timing was so perfect. We were just discussing it at practice. and I discuss it a lot. And you call it a little bit of different name, but when we hit it, I'm looking forward to discussing it with you so we can get a little bit more deeper on it. And it's something, I mean, the good part about all of this stuff is that it's all things that we all feel, right? It doesn't matter what sport you're in. If you're competing, these are things we feel. And, before the show, we were all just talking, and some things are going to be named different. Some things you'll find named different in different cultures or different styles. Even in the SCA, it's named different in every, in different kingdoms. So, I think that the good part is the more you understand and hear things, the more educated we get. So who else helped you on this book?
I have a nice little intro written by Kai.
Hello.
Awesome.
And then so for the photo shoot itself, I go back to the book. It's one of these things. I'll do that later. I have my cadet Apollonia is in the photo shoot. Sir Fern was one of my models. And we also got this newer woman, Astra, at my practice, who's one of the models.
Awesome.
And then as well, right, I have a bunch of folks in the greater fencing community. So Stephen Fraudus, who translated one of the Bolognese texts, has been a great resource for me. And then Devin Borman from Academy Duello. He's like Don Prosper in the SCA. I've both studied a lot with him, and he's also written a how-to for Rapier that I pulled a lot from. And then for getting the book together itself, I got a ton of help from Guy Windsor. So Guy Windsor's kind of like the preeminent HEMA teacher these days. He wrote a book that he put out this last year that I got to be a beta reader for, which is How to Write a Fencing Book.
Nice.
So, because like I knew how to do this thing, I know how to teach it in person, but this is my first book, where he's helped me a ton with like, how do I publish a thing, right? Where do I go? Okay, so if I publish via Ingram, they take less of a cut than Lulu does, and Amazon does these things. And you find this person to do this, and my freelancer isn't ready for this thing. But if you want to find a good layout guy, go on this website. So shout out to Guy Windsor.
Fantastic, yeah.
Go buy all of his books.
Yeah, and he has a book on how to write a book on rapier fighting.
How to write a book on fighting.
Fighting, yeah, excellent. I'll have to look into that. I just wanted to say as well that I've really enjoyed getting to know Master Raphael, and he's taught me quite a few things about rapier, cut and thrust, etc. And fundamentally, I'm really looking forward to reading this new book that you've written, because through the Blousfechten, a little bit of that experience I have, and in my Kendo and the Ido experience, and steel rebated fighting, all my rattan longsword experience, and all the things I've done with Lichtenauer and Fiore over the years, having been trained in and studied. I'm really looking forward to, getting into this C&T longsword with that 7 Embers longsword I recently got based on your suggestion from Sam. So it's going to be awesome.
All right. So, while we're sitting in this path, I mean, obviously this book's going to come out pretty soon. Where's it going to be available?
It should be available this week. I'm releasing the printed and the ebook at the same time. The printed one is ready to go, but the website needs me to put in both. So the ebook should be ready like Wednesday, end of the week. It should be ready end of the week. Should it?
Welcome to the publishing business, right?
God,
yeah. I guess let's go ahead and we'll give a kind of start to, what do you cover in your first chapter? I mean, how do you introduce this book? I mean, how about you wrote the intro, right? How do you pronounce your name?
Me?
Yes.
It's Kai. It's Kai. Hello.
Kai. Yeah.
Yeah. So Raphael asked me to write a foreword for his book. I first met him when he was about 14. He's like this kid kind of walked into our local fencing practice and was like, "Hey, I want to stab people."
Nice.
And
how it starts.
It's been an honor and a privilege to see him grow as an athlete, as a competitor, as a scholar, and now as a leader and a peer, and just a pillar of our community. And like, I don't fight with a longsword. The system, the historical system that I do study doesn't actually cover a two-handed sword, other than the montante, or the great, the spadon, the great sword, is gigantic swords.
Right.
But it's been really it's been interesting and informative to see Raphael grow into this into this particular discipline, and really make it his own. And it's also kind of great. It's also continues to be great to see the SCA and its members really sort of lead the way in uncovering and providing these sources for not only the SCA, but the historical fencing community at large.
Yeah, it's on that point, it's been kind of interesting, and maybe we'll just have a little quick discussion on it. It's for a long time it was like, oh, poo-poo the SCA, everything's not real, they just do their own thing, everything's made up. And it's been interesting, and not only in the sports end, but also even in arts and sciences and things like that. And it's been interesting the way some historical stuff has been going, where it's like, hey, these people are actually getting a chance to practice and live it a little bit more. So that idea of, we found a lot of things that, true educators brought out and said, hey, this is the way it is because I looked at all the pictures and I figured it out. And now all of a sudden they're like, that can't be the way it is, because this is the way it actually works when you do it. And now we're starting to get that feedback, both on the art side, and I think, on your side as well. It's like, that's great. And I see this a lot in like martial arts books. It's like when you have a picture, you don't have the split second of something being done, and it's very difficult to explain it. So those are the experiences that you're trying to share with people that's very difficult in a book. So, and the media today has really helped this. And I think the SCAs, because of people like you guys, has grown into a place where, hey, they have a lot of experience to lean on, and they do this competitively. They educate themselves on a level that's, that pushes them into a place where they can talk one-on-one with somebody who may not practice the art, but understands the art or the books. And I think that's changed a lot of the way the SCA is viewed. And, even HEMA has changed, from straight out of the books to more competitive scenarios in the last number of years.
It has. And Raphael will be, you'll be in good company in terms of folks from the SCA whose contributions to the art have expanded outside of the outside of our club, right? I think first we had Puck Curtis, and Don Puck Curtis out of the West Kingdom wrote a book called From the Page to the Practice back in 2008, based on research that he and his wife had done in Spain. And then after that we had Master Chrétien Fournier, James Clock, translated a German scholar, which has formed the basis of multiple curricula actually within the Illinois, Wisconsin kind of HEMA community. And I'm looking forward to see who picks your book up too.
So Raphael, have you is this something that on your end, is it something you're actually going out and doing a lot more HEMA stuff lately, it seems like, or outside the SCA community and competing in those communities, since they got a culture that's growing into a lot more competitive culture now. We just talked about you traveling to, where was that? Malta. And obviously people from around the world probably went there for that one. You had a lot of participants there. So what kind of difference do you see between those communities right now? And what's actually even better, what kind of, in the past we kind of had you do your thing, I'll do my thing. What kind of bonding between the two is going on?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, swords are swords. Yeah. Right. I've been in a lot of hobbies in my life. I've been in a lot of different groups, right? Religious, political, etc. And the place I always feel most at home is with other sword people. It doesn't matter if they're from the SCA or they're from HEMA or they live in Vienna or Seville or Vancouver. I can go to any of those places and go, sword, and feel right at home. So for me, the biggest thing is what ties us together. I think there's a couple interesting pedagogical differences between how HEMA is generally taught versus how SCA practices tend to run. Mm-hmm. So the trend I've noticed, so HEMA kind of works off like the dojo style of teaching, right? If you've taken any, like you took Taekwondo or Judo or karate as a kid, anything like that, right? There's the teacher and there's 12, 20 students, and we're all going to do this drill. And that's most of the class. And then there might be some free sparring at the end. The SCA model, and again, this varies, tends to be a lot more, here's 2 hours, you get 5 20-minute one-on-one sessions. Do with that what you will. At the high end, what that produces is you get a lot of people getting really individually tailored feedback, which helps them up a lot. The downside is, again, if you don't have a good teacher, it doesn't matter what model you're using. But the SCA model requires a lot of initiative from the student, right? So I spent last year, every single week, I went, hey, Logos, I'm working on this. And he went, all right, let's work on it. But he didn't show up to practice telling me we were going to work on that. I had to do that on my own. The HEMA model, right, is a lot easier for people to kind of plug into, right? Like, okay, there's a 10-week class starting January 10th, right? Cool, I have to pay this amount of money. There's the teacher. I'll get through this curriculum. Yeah. The flip side of that I've seen is the HEMA model tends to have an averaging effect. So because we're all in one class and we're all doing the same thing, it's hard to get left behind, but it's also hard to get a lot of one-on-one coaching. So when I go to HEMA tournaments, there's no one I see just getting one-shotted by high-end folks. But I also tend, and again, I've only really competed in HEMA in the Midwest, so if it's different other places, I could be wrong. I tend not to see the same level at the top end as I do, right? If I have to go fight Titus, or if I have to go fight Alexander, or if I have to go fight Vindus, or if I have to go fight Donovan, right? I tend not to have people at that level I'm worried about at a HEMA tournament. But that said, I'd say that HEMA is growing at a much, much faster pace than we are because their model is a lot easier to show up to on day one. And it's a little harder to get left behind. At the end of the day, right, like swords are swords, and there's a HEMA school a mile down the street from me. And if I have a day off, I'll go over there and fight. And I'll go to our practice and fight. And it's all the same swords, and it's all the same books. And they're all lovely people.
Well, that's good. And they're pretty inviting on, that's not that you're them and we're us type of scenario anymore.
No. Yeah, they're just like, hi, right? Like I have to wear a jacket over there. I don't have to do that over here. Right. They like to grapple a little bit more. That's fine. Right. But yeah, yep. I'm a guest in their house and I have to I'll double check what their rules are. Right. Like essentially HEMA fencing is just like SCA cut and thrust. So draw cuts aren't really a thing. But as long as I'm like, hi, how are we doing it over here? People are perfectly happy to have me.
Perfect. That's good to hear. Yeah, go ahead. Mike.
So one of the things that I've experienced regarding your question, Brannos, about HEMA versus SCA, and by the way, I've started to use the term rattan waster as our weapons that we use in the SCA. I don't know if you've noticed that, but and a lot of that is because the crossover of HEMA and the Masters Works and CNT, and then also our heavy fighting. But there's a number of HEMA fighters that are coming into our Cleveland group, SCA fight practice, and they're really interested in the level of competition that we have there at our group. They get to put on a lot more armor. They have to, and they're enjoying the ability to do more of the 14th century style armor, especially. Generally, they're not coming in and being Vikings. They're doing a little heavier armor because that's longsword, right? Just the other day, I had one of them was watching me fight longsword. I was very, very interested. They asked me some questions and said that I said, well, when are you coming out to do longsword here? He said, well, I've got to get better gauntlets. I don't have good enough gauntlets to do that yet. And I said, well, great. We'll look forward to when you get those gauntlets come out. I'm happy to share what I do and look forward to, learning from you from the HEMA side of your experience and, move forward. But it's definitely more of a blending kind of opportunity and action that's, I think, starting to happen, which I think is really good. Although I will also say, oddly enough, and I agree with Raphael, that it seems like, and this is kind of just my take, my experience, but it seems like the HEMA stuff is growing at leaps and bounds faster than what we see in our group, in SCA, specifically in Cleveland, but from other areas that I talk to guys to as well. And I think it's because, as Raphael alluded to, I can pay my money. It's this day. I can look forward to going. I got to have everybody's got to have the same gear, blah, blah, blah. You go, you have a 2-hour class. It's structured like a dojo class. Even all my experience, I know you do stuff like that a little bit, Brannos, in some of your practices. I can only really do that in my personal dojo practices, right? Based on how I was taught kendo and iaido, right, years ago. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a better teaching format than what we have in Cleveland group, and I think generally everywhere in the SCA. But it's everybody's got to buy into something like that versus HEMA. It's the owner, it's the headmaster who says this is what we're doing.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the real hard part in a lot of this, and it is the much easier part, entry mode into a classroom scenario, is because you're covering one thing. You don't have to worry about, hey, what's your persona? Hey, what's your new name? Hey, you're going to come over in armor? Hey, you're going to get in garb? You're going to go to this thing or whatever.
You got to be here next week.
Yeah, and the good piece in a class scenario is that, and this is the thing we have been seeing a lot of, where we've been lucky with the number of new people, and that is many of the new people coming in just don't have even a sports background sometimes. And when you don't have that background, it makes a very difficult entry point if you don't have a training curriculum, because they don't even know how to move. They haven't understood the dynamics of fighting movements, or even just think of, hey, I'm going to go and figure out how to dribble a ball. Well, you can dribble a ball, but how about all the basketball work and all the other things that make that up? These are people that may have not learned even how to stretch right, or do simple things that we may have learned in school or in some other thing they haven't been introduced to. And now throw a sword at them. Who in the hell is introduced? Here's a weapon. Now nobody's, not many places you're going to come with a sword background to do stuff. So setting up an education piece and building a place where they feel safe, and where they feel, that they don't, that they're not the bottom of the bin or whatever, and they're just trying to find their way in to get some learning, like we tend to do in our practices, right? It's like, I'm going to wait around until somebody calls me out, and then I'm going to get some learning from them, and then I'm going to go to somebody else, and maybe it's the same learning, maybe it's not. I'm just getting thrown stuff at, right? Mm-hmm. Where, when you do go to a class, it's much more comfortable. You're doing the same thing as everyone else. It's not just you by yourself.
Yeah. Although I think there's a lot more similarity across cultures than there are differences. You talked about sort of some of the sort of LARPy aspects of the SCA, garb and personas and stuff like that. what I've started to see as I've, met more of the HEMA community, around the Midwest, is that even the stuff that they wear, like, HEMA black plastic, like we're seeing more, I'm seeing more and more like just, period inspired armor design, gear designs. I love all the crazy Lance Connect colors that people will show up with their gambesons on. I'm like, that, dude, that's, and people they ask like, do I need like a different thing for your event? Like, dude, that what you're wearing is literally fine. You even have the hat.
Yeah. It's amazing to see. I've been some of my guys have been buying that just to even fight it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and like that's what they're wearing. That's what they're wearing to fight. And like at the end of the day, right? I mean, swords are cool, and there's that creates a commonality of interest and a commonality of passion that it doesn't really matter where you started. There comes a point where we all love this stuff. We all love the sport, and it doesn't really matter where we picked it up from, as long as we can come to an understanding of what the particular rules and safety conventions are. We just love to play, and swords are great. And Carl, to your question, right? You talking about Kendo and Aikido practitioners. One of the people that Raphael mentioned is one of the models in photo shoots, Sir Fern. He is also a 6th degree black belt in Aikido, and I have been on the receiving end of that multiple times, and it's kind of great.
Nice.
We are trying to learn from some of the HEMA schools around in terms of like figuring out what are the kind of basic concepts and skills that someone who walks in and says, I like this, but like, I don't know, all I know is the sword goes that way, right? Trying to learn from our HEMA friends how to sort of establish a baseline level of skills that will help someone become a fencer who is safe for themselves and others. And also, I've seen, some of the HEMA clubs drawing from our traditions as well, in terms of like, pomp and circumstance, mm-hmm. and garb, but also some of the, the individual mentoring that I think is the strength of our particular instructional model, where you'll have a knight and their squires, or a master of defense and their students, really diving into a particular thing. So like in our practice, we have Italian rapiers, and we have German rapier, and we have Spanish rapier, and we have long swords and side swords. There's a lot more there in terms of just things than you might see in some HEMA schools. And you're right. Raphael's right. It does make it harder for people to decide what they want to do, but it also makes it easier for people to sample and pick and choose and say, "Hey, I would like to try this," and then we can guide someone to the right person to help them. And so I think there's a lot of learning on both sides, and there's a lot of opportunities to continue to learn and become better teachers, and find ways to meet students where they are and really bring them along this journey, so that the sport as a whole grows.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is it keeps us as constant students as well, right? I mean,
yep.
It keeps us constantly learning, and not only about how maybe to be a better teacher, but even learning new disciplines. I mean, it's mm-hmm. when I see this a lot in martial arts, is like many martial arts schools go out and they compete against other schools in the same discipline. So yep. They have the fundamentals that are the same. They understand how to block those same fundamentals. They understand how to execute those same fundamentals. But then when you break outside the box, it starts getting very dangerous. And, the one nice thing that the SCA has is there is no box, right? I mean, it is pretty wide open, and we fight people, especially if you tend to be active across the world or whatever, you fight people from everywhere.
Yeah.
And because the learning styles are so different, it's interesting that it's really hard to put people in boxes sometimes, even in their own styles, because they all learn their own way, good or bad.
Right. And that's something that I think, another SCA person, a friend of ours, her name is Master Gwyneth Verkewen, has contributed, right? She wrote a paper. She's a therapist by training, and she wrote a paper on the psychology of creating an inclusive and welcoming practice.
Yes.
And apparently, like, that paper has gone out far and wide. And she told me the other day, it's like it showed up on a German HEMA Club's website, like, nowhere.
Yeah.
And this is the best part about this community. Like, we may tease each other a little bit, but we don't really care where you came from at the end of the day. We want to get together, and we want to share our knowledge, and we want to fence with each other, and the more the merrier.
Yeah, I can't agree more. It's like I said, it's been fun, and I think at some point, and it's interesting how HEMA is, they're like some of the new salets that I see out there and things like that. I mean, It's just incredible, and some of the new the black plastic armor ABS stuff they're working with is really, really nicely done too. And the part is, there may be a point where it's like, hey, can I come to this SCA thing? Is like, sure, you got the stuff to wear there, and maybe they do want even a little bit more. And the good part is, I think both places can operate together and
Absolutely.
and leverage the fun and ultimately in life, where the energy that's around the thing you really enjoy doing.
Yeah, Raphael, you can probably talk to this more than I can, but I know Devin still brings his students to SCA events because he wants to watch them get their butts kicked by someone who's fighting in a completely foreign system,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, no, and like every single one of the period masters tell you, like Fiore mentions this, Capoferro mentions this, like, you have to get out of the house. I think one of the, and I've seen like many sides of the SCA, right, good and bad. I've seen many sides of HEMA, good and bad. One of the traps, especially in that formal school model, and I've seen this like in other martial arts I've done, right, is the way you progress is just by going to class at your school. And I think one of the huge benefits the SCA has is, right, even if you don't go to Penzik, you don't go to golf, right, like, you probably go to an event, right? Like, I think we have, at my 2 practices, we have one fencer who's been around for over a year who hasn't been to an event yet. That's it. Right, like, right, and even if, right, I do Bolognese Longsword. In Malta, I got to fence some of the people from Vienna who do Bolognese Longsword. And like, their guards do not look like my guards. Right? Like, we're using the same book with the same woodcuts in it, different interpretations. Same thing of like my Italian rapier and the Italian rapier of the HEMA school down the street from me looks different. And if you only ever know how to solve just this set of problems, you're missing something from the art. I got to do some Spanish rapier against some of the guys from Seville when I was over in Malta. And everyone I know who does Spanish rapier, who does destreza, learned it from Kai. All of us. And these folks didn't, right? They read it in the original and figured it out. And I was like, oh, that is not the way I expected you to move. And we often underestimate how much people got around back in period, right? It wasn't uncommon for a peasant to go on a pilgrimage from England to Jerusalem, right? We know of lots of fence, right? Like Fiore, like, fought in Germany for a while. We have the Neapolitans, right, southern Italy, complaining about the Spanish fencers,
and the other way around.
Yeah, we have George Silver complaining about anyone who puts spice on their food. Right, like, these people fought each other, right? And Spanish rapier and Italian rapier are radically different things. But Pacheco is 1599, and Gigante is 1606. Like, they're doing stuff at the same time, and they're fighting each other. And you need to know, right, Brannos, you need to know how your A-frame, right, works against someone, right, with that more like rectangular, squared up style, right? If you only ever fight A-frame fighters, you're missing something.
Yeah, and in fact, I think what's even bigger here is you have to learn patterns, because the way the brain works is the more patterns you understand, the earlier you can see and understand that pattern. This is the way it works in chess. They don't look at every piece on the board, right? They chunk the board, and they're like, I know that pattern. I've seen it 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
So that same thing happens when we look at a fighter. It's like, I know that stance. I've seen it 100 times. I know where they can, what they can do in that stance. So you're already ahead of them. And that's why it's important to have that change.
Yeah. And one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about with my students, and also in my book, is you need to limit the decisions that are possible. Right. So if I line up with a longsword guard and my sword's kind of just in the middle of me, you can hit me here and you can hit me here. I don't know where you're going. This is bad for my health. Right. If my guard is here, this side's taken care of. You're not you're not going to throw a strike into this. So I only have to chunk anything coming at this side. And thus, right, I have a thing prepared to deal with it. Right. That comes with time and experience. There's a lot of just like, right, fighting is such a high speed game. Especially like with swords, right? There's not even that many moving pieces. Like I did judo for a little bit, and I was like, there are so many limbs I have to go deal with right now. Right? If we each have one longsword, it's pretty easy to keep track of. I can see everything that's going on. And I need to make it so that you can only do one thing at this moment, and then you're going to do it, and we'll see if I can counter it. But if I have to take in every possibility, you can always do it. Like, that's terrifying. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to force you into this little trap over here. And we'll see if it works. It doesn't always work. But yeah, if I use proper structure and I set up my guards right, I will force you into just this thing, and I can concentrate on just that.
I wanted to ask Raphael a question.
Go for it, man.
From a viewpoint, myself being a teacher of longsword and been around for a long time, I'm curious what you find in longsword to be one of the most challenging things to teach your students, whether they're the new students or the intermediate advanced. Just what do you find most challenging?
Getting them to show up every week.
Besides that, yeah,
that's the hardest one.
Man, big.
It's really here.
Yeah. So I'd say.
Can you teach that? I've never had any luck teaching.
No, I don't know how to do that one. One of the big things I see a lot. So humans are really used to our body ending here, right? Like this is right. Proprioception is the idea of like. So if anyone's watching this, so close your eyes. Touch your nose, that's proprioception, right? Hand-eye coordination as I look out and I see. So we're used to our bodies ending here. What happens then is a lot of people, right, try and block everything with the end of their body. A sword is a giant lever that I can make a ramp with. And this doesn't extend very far. If I don't hit my light, right, if I can point and create this ramp for you to go into, and I can stop you all the way out here, my life is a lot better. I require a lot less strength to push you around, right? I learned just a ton of my fencing from Sir Logos. He's over twice my age, and he isn't very large, right? He's not physically pushing me around.
Right.
It feels like he is sometimes, but like, right, I can generate more newtons of force than he can, like objectively. But like, I'm not Terry, my master defense, right? Again, is over twice my age, has had like several joints replaced. I'm going to beat him in an arm wrestling contest. I can't push his sword around. Like, I've tried. It doesn't work.
It's not easy.
Right. Because he understands leverage. He understands if I point and I make this ramp, and if my tip is on the same line as my arm, this gives me that structure. And if I punch at people with the shortest weapon I have, I get folded in half like a pretzel. But it takes a long time for people to get there. And if you look at brain scans of old carpenters, their brain thinks of the drill or thinks of the hammer as part of their body. And it thinks their body ends there. And I'm sure any experienced fencer in the audience is like, oh, yeah, I have this giant long, 42-inch finger attached to me every Tuesday night. That's where my body is.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to get that in your bones, and it takes a while.
Yeah.
And then you have to trust it, and that can be even scarier.
So then drilling, getting your opponents to drill is probably one of the challenging things. Certainly is on my case as well. You know, especially off practice drilling, because they want to come to the practice and just have fun fighting, right?
Yeah. One of my missions in life is to kill that bifurcation. There's this idea that like there's drilling and getting better, and there's fighting and having fun, and they're two separate things.
Yeah, and they're not. They're both very important, right?
And like I'll admit, like I don't actually have that much fun like in the gym working out. That one I just do to be better at swords. But like what I find really engaging is showing up and problem solving and figuring out how am I better than I was last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I can do that in a coach sparring or a free sparring or a drill scenario. But like as much as fun as swinging a sword is, and swinging a sword is a ton of fun. Right. One of the thing that drives me to go to practice multiple times a week and then to do less fun things like work out and stretch and move my body is, hey, I want to, Kai hit me with this thing last week. I need him not to do it next week. And if I take in all the fighting all at once, I'm not going to solve that problem. And if I address just, the fact that I'm unable to close out his outside line, now it's a solvable problem, and it's small enough I can hopefully try and see if it works tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the cultural elements of the SCA particularly that I think is different from your typical HEMA school, right? So our barrier to entry is much lower. You can just sort of walk in, right? And that creates a broader diversity of interest. Some people really do want to learn how to get better, and they want to learn how to do it in a historically documentable way. Some people just like playing sword tag, and within the game that we play, like these are both valid. But Raphael, I think you're right. Like the more people we can sort of show how fun it is to actually learn this material, and incorporate it into the game that we play. I think there are a lot of benefits from that, other than being sort of the educational mission of the society, right? Many of us who are older than you, Raphael, have adopted historical systems because we broke ourselves. We all know fencers who can't fence anymore because they broke themselves doing things that will land a shot in a tournament, but are actually really bad for their bodies.
Oh, wow.
And, looking at what people who have done these things for a living and possibly to stay alive, and the writings that they have put down in terms of, how they have done it over the years and years and years, gives us the ability, it gives us the ability to fight longer and more safely. There are things that I just simply can't do anymore, and because I was stupid when I was in my 20s and thought that I could do the same thing that I did with a foil or an epee with a rapier that weighs 1 kilogram, and it turns out that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted. Brannos, you're on mute. Brannos, you're still on mute.
So I think you're 100% right. There are just certain people that just come in and just want to have fun. I think what we saw in the SCA when it originally started, and we still see it somewhat, because there was no structure and there was, you didn't have really hardcore styles or training at practice. People with athletic backgrounds could come in, compete, and win from time to time. And then and we've seen this happening in the SCA, and we've seen it not only in what we do, but in things like dance and everything else, is that as you learn a style and you focus on something, you get more consistent, and that consistency builds, and you understand what you do better and better. And so now in the SCA, it used to be, I remember when I started, I jumped in out of kendo, and I'm like, woohoo, and I had energy, and I 100% attack, and I could kill some, I could kill a lot of people, and then I would lose to the worst people or a brand new person, right? Because there's no consistency. But for people that just live on that adrenaline, that's what they want to do. And I think that's getting phased out of the society a little bit, mostly at, especially when you get into more of the top levels, and in that we have fundamentals that everybody's talking about, and we see all of these styles now developing. And so even if you have a lot of great energy and you can jump on people, now people are just, it's not a thing anymore. You can just, you're more comfortable, because you have a great foundation of something. You're just not made up of gravel that's just you're trying to grab a piece of. You have a foundation method, and that's what you're using to stay safe. You're on mute.
Yeah, turnabout's fair play. No, that's absolutely, that's absolutely right. And one of the things that we always talk about is like meeting your student where they are. Understand what their goals are and try to accommodate those, right? Because if someone comes in and they don't really know what they want to do, they just know that swords are fun, and they've maybe seen some, they maybe really like the Princess Bride or Game of Thrones or whatever it is, like that's okay. We can encourage, but particularly in the SCA, right? Because we can't we don't sort of exclude people, from the society for not having the same kind of interest in a particular thing that we do. And so, it is incumbent on us to be able to serve that entire, the breadth of the community, and, find ways to make it fun for the people who just want to show up and sling swords, and then also give everyone the opportunity to maybe train a little more deeply, and that's okay. We don't, and it makes us better, right? There are people who want to do, they come in, we had a guy walk into our practice, and he's like, I want to do this one system, which none of us had ever heard of it. None of us had ever looked at it. And so we bought the book and started going through it. And, now we're learning how to use it too. Some people come in, their background is in LARP fighting or lightsaber combat, and they want to know what to do, how a real sword works. And, okay, you can start with what they already know and build on that, and, try to help them be safe. If someone is doing something that is going to get them hurt, maybe they're, lunging with their foot turned so their knee lands sideways. Yeah, we're going to say something, right? We don't want people to just blow out a knee or hurt themselves. But if that's sort of where it ends, then that's okay.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think the best part is with those people that are coming into the background, maybe they're not willing to listen now, but it's interesting. The ones that do start looking, it's like, ooh, what you're doing is working, so I'm going to start doing that. And then at some point, if they really do, if they're just not looking for some dopamine fix, and they actually want to learn and they see a path, then you could end up with somebody just as good or better than you that you're teaching, that pushes you to become a better person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So, well, I'm going to jump back because we've had a great conversation, so I didn't want to jump too crazy here. I'd like to jump back to, and I actually do want you want to share a link out to the group. Did I see?
Yeah.
What is that link to?
That is a link to the presentation entitled "Creating a Safe Training Environment for Non-Male Students."
Perfect, because this was actually somebody was looking for it. So
yep. I got it to them directly, but I couldn't post that here.
No problem.
There it goes.
There we go. Yep. And so let's jump back real quick. And although, this is what happens in every conversation I tend to have on Coach's Corner with a bunch of great people that think, close to the same way. And I bring up a bunch of topics that we want to cover. And I think we covered some of it already, but we covered a little bit of the historical context. We went far beyond that. And, it was really nice to hear, Eikbrandr, that you're getting people as like, hey, I want to do 14th century stuff. And the longsword there, it's because that is a thing, right? And, and then we start kind of touched on some structure and the importance of structure, right? So number two, in your book, do you dive into structure? Like, is this structured training? Is this structure?
Yeah, I talk about both. I'm using the term structure to mean like mechanical structure.
Yep. Okay.
Right.
Body of your body.
Yeah. So there should be an unbroken chain from the tip of your sword. So like I'm right-handed, right? To this hand, to this elbow, to this shoulder, to the other hip, down into your knee, down to your foot, down to the ground.
Yep.
So this is gonna be hard to like demonstrate that in person. One of the things I'll do is I'll get people up, right? Like, hey, so I need you to push out like this, right? And have the other person be here. And if I put all my bones in place, I can move around a much larger person, right? If my elbow is winged out, right, now this is doing the work instead of like my quads. And I'm going to like collapse. So if I can be here and push people, right, now using my structure instead of using my strength, right. And, this is still, especially if you're interested in tournament fighting, this is a sport and strength is helpful. Most of where that comes in, I find, though, is not getting you into good situations, but getting you out of bad ones, right? I can retreat like no one's business because I train that. But the reason I'm bullying your sword around isn't my biceps. It's because I'm pulling on the pommel and it's creating this nice straight line. As well, right? Like the less strain I have to put on my muscles to do this thing, and the more I can just have my body's natural shape solve the problem. Now I'm not putting as much impact on those joints, right? At the end of the day, like I was taught to fight from old people. I then added some athleticism on top of that, which is a great recipe for success. But like, I learned to fight from old people who didn't move very much. And one of the things, so I spent a lot of time like watching fighting video, and one of the things I've seen over and over again is if it's more than just a couple rounds, the person winning is the person who's moving less. So if I can use my structure to make your sword exit the picture, now my next move is pretty easy. If I have to push your sword out of the way, and then that takes time, it takes energy. It's right. You might be moving at a faster velocity, but it's more time on the clock. And if the other person is a sneaky 74-year-old man who's come back from the dead to murder you, it's not going to work. Ask me how I know.
We know.
In there. Well, there's like the demonstration that we'll do, right? Like you're a significantly small, you're quite a bit smaller than I am. And so what we'll do sometimes is we'll have, the before and after, right? We'll just have them like, someone hold their arm up and just, I'll push. And I'm a pretty big dude, and they'll, I can move people relatively easily. And then we'll have them sink into their structure. And now my feet are sliding around the floor. No one is, like they're not going anywhere. And because like I can move a person, I can't move the planet. And when you have the right structure, that's what ends up happening. We do this with swords too. Like you can say like, why is it important to have the strong part of your sword and the weak part of theirs? It's like, well, okay, well, I can beat a lot of people in arm wrestling, but I can't lift a person's entire body with just with just my forearm. It just doesn't happen. And so like structure will beat athleticism a lot of times. And if you get in Raphael's right, if you can combine them both, great. But structure will help you be more athletic longer. That's what I found.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of funny because I for probably 25 years plus, I've been teaching the idea that power doesn't have to come rotationally, and that like if you look at most of my shots are straight down between the shoulders, and it's because between the shoulders, anything outside your shoulder, you have to use your shoulder and arm to create power. Not that rotational power. There's you can get great rotational power. Obviously, that's why we swing baseball bats instead of trying to play cue ball with them, right? But there's a lot less shoulder engagement throwing across the body. And now all of that power, including your kinetic chain, is delivered through that line straight at your opponent, which is also the fastest path, and it's to your opponent at the same time. So there's a lot of that fundamental in almost any sport that you want to try. So not that you still don't want to throw a circular round kick and develop rotational power, but that spinning back kick, which is you're spinning, but that kick comes straight out at the end, and that's actually the most powerful one that you're gonna throw, right? So you just have to understand what tool is used for what and what the weaknesses of each of those tools are. So Ike, what do you have to say? You're being quiet. You're like, I'm loving this conversation. You're just loving it too much is the problem. I have not ever heard you so quiet.
Well, part of me being quiet is I'm just kind of absorbing some of these new ways of thinking about something that isn't a rattan waster, right? I mean, I've been fencing for quite a while. I fenced with foil, and then we got into doing some saber, and then eventually got to rapier, et cetera, and that was 2000 time frame forward from there. But most of my formative training came under Duke Laurelin, and he had been trained by Oskar Kolombatovic, a Hungarian sword master back late 60s, something like that. But Laurelin never really did a lot of teaching about this master teaches this master teaches that, et cetera, et cetera. He just, having learned all those things from Oskar, he kind of compiled his own way of doing the fighting, whether it was fencing, saber, rapier, because he had been taught all that long before he got into the SCA. That's one of the reasons why he was pretty good once he started in the SCA in 1976 or whatever it was, because of all the teaching he had via that master and his educational program. But there's a number of things that I'm doing with my rattan longsword school, which is somewhat different than what we're talking about here today. So I don't want to take too much time relating that, because this is about Raphael and his book, in my opinion.
Well, I think it's an open conversation. I think that's the big piece. And I think if you look at Raphael, he's this whole conversation's been, let's take a little bit from everything, right?
Yeah. And okay, so the nature of my rattan longsword school is as I'm defining it and starting to call it male fectin. So I'm designing a school that even has a different name than blouse fectin or harness fectin, right? I've coined my school male fectin because it's learning how to use a rattan waster sword as if it was a Passau longsword with a 40-inch blade and a 12-inch hilt, and probably weighing 4 to 5 pounds medievally, and developing techniques that kind of from the Lichtenauer Fiore school in the heavy battlefield style of longsword fighting, when they were actually using mail armor, bassinets, things of that nature, but not the really good white harness, if you will, from the late 14th century, more like the 15th century, into, our armor. Once they started wearing the full white harness with the selays and the breastplates and all that, harness fecting became a thing that they would use, to my understanding, to fight against somebody wearing all that armor as well. So Lord X fighting Duke Y, both wearing hardened steel armor, and it's lighter, but all the voiders and the mail and everything else, they had to use. That's why you have S-stocks being designed, right? But they started using the half sorting harness fecting styles, because the only way they could really do anything to anybody was smash them in the head with a pommel via a half sorting technique, or drive a quillen into their eye slot, or more generally also a point into their groin or their eye slot or their underarm, right? But there was a lot of fighting that was done with the bigger long swords, as I described a minute ago, in the 1330s, still wearing transitional plate into the 1380s and 90s, And so when I'm teaching my rattan longsword school, we got to hit with 8s out of 10 for it to be good, right? So I've got to teach proper body rotational structure, body turning, and so like when I do CNT, I'm using what I'm calling blouse fect into the hands, right? So you're mostly just doing, these kind of things, because I don't have to do anything else, because it's touch convention. And more importantly, I can manipulate my opponent's blade easier by doing that, because it's out in front of me. And then there's blouse fecting of the body, where you're starting to use body and hands, and then blouse fecting of the feet, or a footwork, where you're now adding all that other stuff into it. So that's kind of where I am. So I'm just trying to absorb a lot of this still from a viewpoint of even tonight's education, if you will. So.
No, and I think that's the key. I think that's what both these guys have been saying, all night. They've had, it's like people bring in lots of those different skills, and the idea is, okay, how does this translate? And if, structure, the good part about structure is once you have that good structure, you can level that up and you can build on it. When you don't have a structure, then you're kind of building on you don't have a foundation to build on. And it's as long as you got that good foundation to build on, you can add power, you can add more feet, you can add more speed, you can add, things that are needed based on to get what needs to be done.
Yeah. And so the blouse fecting /CT longsword is my least practiced, my least educated form of longsword, and that would have been what we'd have done. You're not generally going to have a longsword when you go into a tavern, right? But if you're not in your armor as a mid 14th century knight, you're not going to use structured body turning cuts to throw cuts to try to cut a guy in half, because he's got to bleed you to death long before that by using faster, lighter cuts and a lot better measure and timing and range, right? So it all kind of ties in, and that's what, like I said earlier, I'm looking forward to Raphael's book.
All right, so the next one, and this, I guess, it ties a lot into just every sport that does what we're doing, and that's measure, right? Mm-hmm. And that's foundational. I'm guessing, Raphael, you find, when we talk this, you probably have read this a million times and some other stuff too. Is there, in the presentation, what's the kind of like key thing you want to cover in measure in your book?
Yeah, so measure historically is an idea that gets kind of developed a little after the Bolognese period. So the rapier masters have a lot of technical terms for it, whereas the Bolognese masters are more just like, well, make sure they're in measure, without giving more details than that. The language I've kind of added, which I'm sure isn't unique, is there's offensive and there's defensive measure, right? So Kai is a very different height than I am. And even if we use the same size sword, even if he uses a shorter sword, right, his ability to hit me is going to be different than my ability to hit him. So defensive measure is the more important of the two, right? Because if you're still alive, you can hit them later. But getting...
It's a good thing to remember.
God, yeah. It's important. You should know where your body ends, and with every sword you have, right? Like, I know where my side sword ends. I know where my short rapier ends, and where my long rapier ends. I know where, right? Like, I have a really intuitive understanding of what I can reach. But spend the time figuring out, hey, can I read how far other people can reach, right? If they're crouched down real low, that's going to be a little bit harder, right? If their sword isn't straight in front of them visually, so our eyes are very bad at this, and they're very good at this.
Yes.
So if someone's coming this way, right, or if someone's footwork is coming straight in, it's going to be harder to tell, hey, where are they? And as much as I harp on structure, and as important as it is, if you're in the right place and you're there at the right time, structure is a tool that'll help you get there. But if your footwork is perfect, you can just hit people for free. So, yeah, right. Like, it's measure is a third of fighting.
No, and I think that's you bring up a great point, and that's, we see that with Bruce Lee. I mean, he could stand straight in front of somebody, but the key is, if you can't see something, this is why he could stand, 15 feet or more away from somebody and say, I'm going to kick you, and still kick him, right? Because there's a lot of control of perception. And I think that's really important to me, it's important to me. It's not always important to some others in their style, but obviously, the straight line, even if I go up, that's a perception that can be seen, and it's not the straightest line to your opponent. So, that straight line is the hardest one to see. And that's why a lot of people are like, oh my God, you're so fast. It's like, no, you just didn't see it. And that's the difference. You didn't get to see it until your eyes didn't recognize what's happening until the end. This is talked about. I've been talking for years about the train effect. Stand on a railroad track and look at a train coming at you. It does not look very fast.
Same reason that's why we have brake lights on cars.
Yeah.
Right. You can't tell that car is slowing down visually. So one of the things I do in my fighting, and at this point it's just so ingrained I don't think about it, is I lie about my measure. Yep. Like 95% of my attacks, right, are this far, and every once in a while I can shoot way farther than that. So even if, right, you can tell how tall I am, you can tell how long my sword is, right, I might be more flexible than you might think, and be able to speed up my footwork at a rate you can't expect. So I'm not giving you my full measure on every fight. I'm only pulling it out when I need to.
So it's like you're feinting your measure, basically. Yeah, nice.
As well, right? Like, so my plan for any event is there's 3 tournaments that day. I want to be in the finals of all of them. I need the energy to do so. I don't have a ton of storage on me, so I don't want to run around a lot. So if I'm using only my giant lunge every time,
right.
I'm going to tire out. If I can hit you just by moving my hand, great. I'll save up the energy for the next fight.
Yeah. And, also in any long attack, there's danger, right?
Yeah, because recovery, Yeah, if they block.
Also timing, right? If they time that long attack and take a different line, it's hard to recover from a longer attack. There's a difference between a short and a long foot, right?
Yeah.
Or a long step.
Yeah, and I tell people the recovery from the lunge is more important than the lunge itself.
Yep.
Right.
There's a number of times like I've seen people get hit on their way out because they thought they had it, and then they drop their sword and then leave.
Yep. So you posted an article the other day, and this is the one I really want to talk about as well, and that's the danger zone. And I'm just so everybody knows, let's go through a couple more topics, and we'll end it on the danger zone. So we talked a little bit about measure there. We talked about tempo. Can you tell us what you perceive tempo as?
So tempo, right, is the Italian word for time. So the thing to remember is I used to say we all had watches. We don't have watches anymore. We have phones. But like our idea of time, right, is like a mechanical thing. That's a very modern conception, right? Back then, right, like there's sunrise, there's like midday, there's evening. They kind of had hours, but like, right, they didn't punch a clock. So they're pulling a lot from like Aristotle's ideas. Anyhow, so a tempo is how long does it take me to do one action, right? So if Brannos, you throw a cut at my head and I parry it and then I strike, right, that's 2 tempi. If you throw a cut at my head and I stab you in the face while you're doing that, that's 1.
That's right.
The goal, if we're both moving at any moment, for me to be in tempo, my action should be proportionally less than yours, right? So if I have the shortest path, right, if my thing takes less time on the clock, I'm going to come out ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if
that's simple math, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even if you move at a higher velocity, right, if I can make you go all the way around,
right,
and I can take a short path, my life is a lot easier. I can go on and on about the topic. I have a friend who wrote a whole book on the history of time. Ken Monshine, look him up when you get a chance. But that's the short version of like, how efficient can I make every motion, right? And again, right, this leads back to energy of, right, fights can take a while, right? We don't put timers on our fights in the SCA. My first champs fight at Pensick was 10 minutes.
Yep, no shot clock.
Yeah. Right. A duel in 16th century Italy started in the evening and ended when someone was incapacitated or the sun had set all the way. That's hours. Yeah. There's not rounds. Same thing with like old school bare knuckle boxing. Like,
oh yeah,
they were 4-hour fights, not 4 hours of 2-minute rounds with a break. They were 4-hour fights. I don't want to do that much. That sounds like a lot, but yeah, I want to move less. I want to move shorter. I want to use less energy.
Yep. No, that's. I think that's a great. I really enjoyed your example of tempo here. It's fundamentally simple. I think, of course, there's other pieces of tempo added on top of that, changing tempo, offsetting tempos, things like that happen in fights. Especially once you set a tempo and change it, becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's also like which tempo in the fight do you like?
Right.
So Dalagoke, one of the authors I pull from, talks about this a lot. Right. So Logos loves hitting people when they're preparing a thing. Right. When you're pulling up for that cut, that's when he runs forwards. Some people, right, like that parry riposte. The thing I look for is the blow, like the tempo after their blow passes your body, right? So if you miss, or if I get you to bind with me and you overcommit enough and your tip leaves my presence, if you're not about, right, if we are in measure and you are not currently threatening me, I get to hit you for free.
Mm-hmm.
So I wait for people to make a mistake and I help them make that mistake. And then I punish them. Right. Kai does not wait.
Right.
Nope. I'm a bully. I'm going to come up there and I'm going to shove your sword out of the way and I'm going to murder you and I'm going to stab you.
Right.
But that's also taking advantage of time, right? I want to create a situation where, so the Spanish systems that I use describe time in a series of in actions. So like a thing may take 3 actions to perform, right? I want to manipulate time so that I can hit you in fewer actions than it takes you to hit me. So if I can control the line, I can attack in like 1 or 2 steps. If you have to, free your sword, get away from, if you have to free your sword, get into a position of safety and then counterattack, well, that's going to take more actions, and therefore I don't have to be faster than them. I just need to be more efficient. We've two members of the Order of Defense now, Gwyneth and Michelangelo. Michelangelo is much younger than Gwen, and there was a tournament when he was kind of just first coming up, where they were in the finals together, and she ate his lunch, and he comes up and goes, man, I thought I was faster than she was. And I just looked at him and said, you are. It just doesn't matter. She was more efficient. And it doesn't matter right, Raphael, it doesn't matter what terms you use for it. Like, if your movements are more efficient than your opponent's, you're going to have an advantage.
Yep, I would agree 100%. Let's move on, and this is that the conversation we had about you're going to have to say the word here. The
Giaco?
Joko.
Yeah. So there's so in Bolognese there's Gioco Stretto and there's Gioco Largo. Fiore has a similar idea. He spells it differently. His is Gioco. The word just means play. So we often interpret all this stuff as like very technical terms, but like, right, it also means like if I'm throwing a ball around, right, like, so it's a very like unique idea to the early Italian systems. So Gioco Largo is the space in which I can do these big flowing actions. It's not necessarily being further or closer, although it often is. But like, is my sword free to leave? Right? Can I prep this big cut? Can I keep doing here? Gioco Stretto is, if my sword leaves, I'm going to get punked in the face. So a thing to remember, medicine sucked back then. It was like, there's the idea like, oh, if you got a single nick, you would die of gangrene. Like, no, people had immune systems. Like, I don't use Neosporin in 2024. But like, medicine sucked. So but people survived amputations, right? If you get cut in the hand, right, your career might be over, but you could live. If you take a thrust to the abdomen, you're done. So they are so much more scared. It also it takes a lot less. So I've played with sharps against like pieces of pork or against Tommy mats or like things of, right, like the calibration I use for like a hand snipe will go through a wool doublet and into your internal organs. You have to aim a cut. If you ever get a chance, right, to cut to Tommy mat, I highly recommend it. It's really informative. I've only done it a few times, but like, I have a decent amount of experience fencing and cutting at things. If I'm throwing like a downwards cut, I can cut through, and all of my other ones get stuck. I can hand a 4-year-old a spike, and they will go through a thing. So Gioco Stretto is that constrained play where if I leave, they stab me. One of the things, so the Anonima Bolognese, one of the texts, talks about, they try and summarize the art, and they say, hey, is your opponent in Gioco Largo? Pull them into Gioco Stretto and fight them there. If your opponent's in Gioco Stretto, pull them into Largo. Right? Take them out of their comfort zone and into the other mode of play and force them to fight you there.
Yep. Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's you read I'm trying to remember who wrote it. I have the book up here somewhere. But in chess, it's the same way. Some people are very creative and others are very controlled. So what you want to do is, if you have a very controlled person, you be very creative and pull them into that creative game, which is not their best place to be in, or the other way around. And some great chess player, one of the great chess players, and I know this book, I've listened to it a million times, but he talked about sitting on the beach and watching when the rain came, their chess match all weekend type of deal. When the rain came, he would watch his people that he played. And if people would cover up and run back in, they were very controlled based people usually. And if they would just hang out and it was no big deal, then the random didn't matter to them so much, because they are all about control. It's all about controlling everything around you a lot of times. So it's that same kind of thing you can actually look for in your opponents sometimes. But here's an example of what you're talking about in a whole different venue, but it's the same thing. Pull them into the other game where they're not as good or as comfortable.
Yeah, I know a lot of Eastern martial arts talk about you defeat strength with weakness and you defeat weakness with strength. Godinho, who's a Spanish writer, who's a Iberian writer from sort of before the sort of Destreza tradition, has talked about established play, which is, I'm set, I'm mostly standing still, and what he calls ripping play, which is more dynamic and moving around. And he says if someone is set up in an established play, you use ripping play. If someone is ripping, you beat them with establishment. These things like they counter each other out.
Yeah, and the book is the book. It's a very popular book in actually a lot of martial arts. I'm having trouble turning that. Okay, it's actually The Art of Learning by Josh Wakens, and it's obviously he becomes push hand specialist and wins the national or the world push hand competition, and but he starts out as a 5-6-year-old chess prodigy. He was supposed to be next Bobby Fischer, but between stress. But this book is all about flow. That's actually what he teaches. That's how he makes a living now, is essentially helping people understand how to get into flow. But number 6 was how to structure drills. And the best part is I think that is one thing a lot of people here look for all the time, and that's we are just touching on things that how we can structure drills in SCA stuff that maybe people will actually do. And Eikbrandr brought that up a lot earlier. We're actually, it's been fun because I've had a number of teachers, including Sir Bess, and that actually started classes at their practices and have people showing up to them is like, you know what, I'll go pick up fights at the end. I want to do this thing at first. We do footwork all the time. We run ladder drills. Every once in a while, we throw them into play where it's like, hey, just go have fun, right? Because play is also, there's a great article today that just came out talking about how it takes in structured practice a lot longer than in play to learn things. But you still have to have those. You have to have structure to be able to
fundamentals.
Yep. So so in your book, do you cover everything from are you giving like breakdowns of like, hey, try this in your pattern or in the style that you're doing?
Yeah, so I both have a lot of drills written out. It's like for every lesson or almost all the lessons, there is here's a drill for this thing. But then also I have a section on how, like, for teachers, how to build drills well.
Perfect.
So I've I've done Wing Chun for years. I did karate as a kid. I did like judo for a minute. I've seen a lot of bad drills.
Yeah.
I feel like people get turned off from drilling because most of the time it sucks. It doesn't just suck because like you're doing reps and they're boring, but it sucks because it's not doing its job.
Right.
So if your drill is, all right, like stand here, I'm going to throw 30 onside shots at you. All right, now it's your turn. That's not learning.
No.
So there's this idea out
especially
there.
if I don't block.
Right, yeah. There's this idea out there as its own topic of like the way you learn is by doing more reps of a thing. And there's truth to that, but there's a huge asterisk. So there's this thing I've been getting into really a lot lately called the ecological approach, which is a lot of like, hey, how do brains actually learn things?
Like
so
the
the human brain is
neurological
really,
approach.
the human brain is really lazy. Right. If you think like evolutionary wise, right, we don't want to spend extra calories. Right. Why would I go do this harder thing if it's an easier thing for me to do? So if a thing isn't pushing you, you're not going to develop to like, unless there's a problem to solve, you're not going to adapt to it. So one of the things, right, is a failure rate. Most drills I've seen are too easy, right? And like you have to start, right? If no one's ever swung a sword, we have to do a little bit of the easy shit. But like ideally, your success rate should be like 70 to 80%. If we're doing a drill and I hit you every time, I need a harder drill. So there's two dials that you can adjust to make this happen. So there's complexity and there's intensity, right? So intensity, right? So let's say, all right, so Ike, you're gonna throw a cut at the left side of my head, and I'm gonna block it. And that's the drill, right? You might, right, go a little faster, right? You might. So another issue people get into a lot of, right, is they get into the rhythm of the drill and hit, and no one fights like that.
Change rhythm, right?
So yeah, you might change
complexity.
The rhythm, right? You might
stop
change
attack
the distance it's at, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the right. You might hit harder. That's the intensity. Complexity is, well, let's add a step before that, right? So maybe I throw a cut, and Ike voids, and then he cuts at my head, right? Because right, we all get stupider the further down the decision tree we get. Right, like move 1 is always going to be cleaner than move 3.
Right.
And
absolutely.
It's really easy to train for the first move, and it's really important to train for move 3. So if I need someone to do a specific mechanical action, I need them to do it under pressure. I will artificially create that pressure by making them do a couple other actions where there still is a success or failure beforehand. Right. So if it's like, so feint to the face, right, disengage, right, we might do a couple of things before that, right, as well, right? So Brannos, you're talking about like play. We often think of drills as like this very structured, right, singular thing. The way I view them is it's anything less than free play.
Yes.
So for instance, I really like throwing this reverso, this like offside shot to people's hands. And the drill I gave myself last week at practice was fight longsword and don't end with that shot. Right. So I'm cutting, right, I'm a righty, I'm cutting to their left side, I'm throwing a thrust, right? And that was, the drill was don't do X, still try and succeed. And that's play, but it isn't just sparring. And it also isn't just who's winning, right? Because the victory, right, if I could score a touch with something else, I was successful. If I fell back onto the thing I didn't want to do, that was a failure state. Right. The other thing with that failure state, right, so all of us are like pretty high up there, right? We have 2 dukes and a couple of mods. One of the things I've found, and like the ecological approach backs this up, right, is it's really easy to say like, hey, I need you to do this option. And then they do the wrong option and you double in the drill. And then I verbally inform them, hi, you're doing it wrong. And they don't fix it. Right? Because like, man, I scored a touch on Brannos. Right? And you know, if some unbelt double that with you in the finals of a tournament, that's their victory for the day. They should feel 100%. Happy. This is a drill. We're not doing that. So you need to create the failure state be you didn't hit me. And then Gwen, again, pulling from Gwen's research that Kai mentioned earlier, the failure state doesn't necessarily have to be you got hit in the face, right? Because a lot of people have a lot of stuff associated with that, right? And now you feel bad. I just need your failure to be you didn't land a shot.
Right.
And it's my job as the coach to create that. as long as I can make that happen, you'll start doing you might ask, you might necessarily be able to figure out the answer on your own, but if I point to the right answer, if none of the other answers are working, you're going to start doing that right answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a whole different conversation. What you're talking about is the step-by-step method a little bit, and which is great. We do that. After a while, it's like, hey, you have a great offside. Now you're not using it, or I'll cut thrusting tips off.
Same here. Same here.
Right, and because if you rely on something too much, then you're actually weakening your other things dramatically over time.
It's predictable too.
Yeah. Neurologically, what happens is there's a certain level of to get dopamine, you have to be right at the edge of success. In other words, you can't make it so easy that you don't have that edge. Then you're not challenged. It's a challenge-based response. To get into flow, you absolutely have to be challenged, right? And our real goal in the end is to try to really find our place where we can get into flow in execution. But, and then on the other end of it, if it's so boring, you're not engaged and there is no way you're going to produce dopamine. And dopamine is a big part, and a number of other drugs go on at the same time, in the actual ability to learn. And there's, as we get older, it gets worse. When you're young, you start that learning cycle and it lasts for a relatively long period of time. For adults, it's much shorter, and they even talk like 5 minutes.
That's because of ego, but whatever.
Some of it, it's actually kind of, I didn't believe it until I'm like, how do you prove this? And then they're like, oh, well, we took prism glasses, and we're like, okay, we have a kid who is 5, and we have an adult, and they're like, put these glasses on. Here's a glass of water. And they have to learn to grab the glass of water. That water could actually be over here. Mm-hmm. And they have to figure out where that glass of water is. The adult sometimes could learn. The kid would get it in 5-10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Because the point in that space, around 25, is when the learning cycle really pretty much drops off hard. But so it's interesting. So we have to put ourselves, especially as adults, we have to put ourselves in those places where we challenge ourselves, right? And that's exactly what these structured drills and a good teacher puts these structured drills together to challenge their students so they can get that.
Yeah. And the flip side is, right, a lot of old SCA practices are, I'm just going to hit you until you figure it out.
Yeah.
Also, right. That's an overwhelming data set, right? If I've got hit 30 times out of 30, I cannot draw a conclusion from that. Yeah. If I got hit 4 times out of 30, I can go, oh, what went wrong that time? So it's right. That's 70 to 80-ish%. That's where people, they feel like they're growing. They feel like they're doing well. They feel like they're being challenged. And it's hard to sit it there, especially if there isn't much of a skill difference between you and your drill partner. It can be really hard to put them into that zone. But if you can, you will make better fighters, and you'll make better fighters faster.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is a conversation I would love to have with all of you guys here again. I'm telling you, it's been fun, and I think all of this is so important to whatever we're trying to be good at. And you have to have some success because that's growth. You have to be able to put your student in that place to have success, and you have to celebrate it. Too many people tear people down. Hey, you did it wrong without any answer, right? Or they don't say when they did it right, even though it didn't hit or it didn't strike exactly the way they want. Maybe all the other technique all the way to that point was in a good place, So you have to find those things to do. And I agree 100% with you. It was, the SCA was much different. And it's one of the reasons why this channel exists, is to talk about how we have to change it, right? So, and Bess just mentioned she just had a 2-hour class again, and she's been doing classes at her fight practice. She just had a 2-hour class at her practice, out of armor, doing drills, having a fun time, and everybody came back with positive thoughts, and they really enjoyed it. And I hear that more and more from lots of people offer anything from a half-hour class to the whole class. So it's good to see, and it's good. I think I've been a little jealous of the of the rapier community for a while, because I feel like you guys have, the great part is you have some fundamental structured books out there, and you really kind of have some things to look at. For us, it's like, guess what? Ike is getting right now. We have some German longsword, but even that's out of armor. Ike is getting to the in armor stuff. But there's not any books. There's not pictures. There's not graphics of how they did things. So we're just assuming based on how we feel in the gear we fight in. So I always looked, I'm like, oh, and you guys spend a lot more time educating people on your styles and on the period styles. And that's always been amazing. I've always loved that insight.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little jealousy on my side. Don't worry about it.
I mean, if you want to come hang out, we'll.
Yeah, we're here twice a week.
This is a solvable problem.
All right. Well, guys, I think we're towards the end here. I want to say thanks, and please, if talk between you guys, because I'd love if you have a couple of subjects you'd like to talk about. We had some great. It was Carl out there was banging on our YouTube page and a couple others, and then we had a nice little group on Facebook as well. There's obviously there's 17 to 20 people out here. People were listening. That's what we usually get. So I think it was a great conversation, and these are the conversations I really enjoy. So if you guys want to cover more stuff when the book comes out, and maybe you get some questions about inside the book and you want to come back and we can all talk about what people ask, I think that's a great way to try to get these conversations rolling.
Sounds good. I've enjoyed myself. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, buddy.
Yep. Likewise. Thank you for the invitation.
Kai, it was a pleasure meeting you here. So I appreciate your input. It was nice to listen to.
I've watched Kai kick ass on the champions teams.
Yeah.
At Penzic and,
we don't get to hang out much, so.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, honestly, the best thing about this whole experience with the book and everything is just watching Raphael grow into a man, one of the greatest of us. I wasn't his primary teacher, but I tried to help him where I could. And one of my favorite things as a peer has been watching people catch up to and then surpass me. And that's how I feel like at this point, that's how I feel I'm successful. And you're doing great, man. You've done some great stuff.
Yep.
I agree 100%. Well, folks, I'd love to say what we have next week. Unfortunately, I don't actually have anything on our schedule, and it may not be next week. We got the holidays and all that in there. We will work stuff out. We will figure what's going to come next. But what I can say is I'm sure everybody here in this group of folks, hope everybody has some great holidays, Christmas, New Year's, all of those kinds of holidays that are around this time. And be safe, spend time with friends and family. And I hope everybody has enjoyable next few weeks. And we'll see you soon. And we'll be back for, some more stuff, some more great conversation. Thank you, everybody.
See ya. Good night.
Good night.